All right, let's dive in. This time we're tackling James K. Polk, the 11th president. Manifest destiny, all that.
Ah, Polk.
We're using an episode of the American History Hit podcast, talked with historian Amy Greenberg.
Interesting.
Get ready, this is not your grandma's history class.
Hmm.
Okay, so Polk, his family moved from North Carolina to Tennessee.
Okay.
They ended up on land, well, originally Native American land.
Right.
They brought enslaved people with them, setting a pattern, kind of, for how Polk approached westward expansion.
Yeah, it wasn't just, one family doing this. It was happening all over. These families, like the Polks, they profited from taking land, removing Native Americans, relying on enslaved labor. It's a tough part of American history.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff, and it makes you wonder how much that, shaped his outlook later on.
For sure.
The podcast also mentions, Polk was a sickly kid.
Right.
Had this crazy surgery, experimental, to remove bladder stones. Makes you wonder if surviving something like that made him, super driven. Had to get things done,
There's definitely this idea that those early health problems, they really fueled his ambition, this relentless work ethic. He was known to push himself, maybe too much.
And then there's Andrew Jackson. Huge influence on Polk.
Oh, absolutely.
More than just a mentor. Political ally, friend, even set up Polk's marriage.
Jackson was a big deal for Polk. Saw himself as continuing what Jackson started. Policies, ideas, all very Jacksonian. He always talked about Jackson, kept his memory alive in politics, kept that influence going even after Jackson was gone.
Wow, that's interesting. So steeped in Jacksonian ideas, but Polk was also a skilled politician on his own, right?
Oh, yeah.
Lawyer, congressman, speaker of the House.
Owned his skills, definitely. Although the podcast says he was the first president to straight up lie to his own party.
Really? Whoa, what was going on there?
Back then, lying in politics was the worst thing you could do. Totally unacceptable. But Polk, he lied about Topic X, a huge issue that was splitting his party.
So he decided to lie even though it could ruin his reputation. What were the stakes?
It could have blown up the party, derailed everything he wanted to do. There was a lot of backlash, hurt some close relationships. But in the end, he got what he wanted.
It makes you think about how much politics has changed,
Right.
Did he set a bad example for future politicians to be dishonest to get ahead?
It's tricky, for sure.
Yeah.
And something we're still dealing with today.
Definitely. Okay, so then there's the 1844 election.
Yeah.
Against Henry Clay. This is where Manifest Destiny really takes center stage, right?
Yeah.
Polk's all about expansion. Annex Texas, get the Oregon Territory. It really resonated with people, this hunger for land and opportunity.
The election showed how split the country was. Clay, he was more about looking inward, build up what we have, focus on the economy. But Polk, he was all about pushing westward.
Right.
Expansion was the key to greatness. A lot of people, especially those looking for a fresh start, they really liked that message.
But all this expansion, it came with a cost. The Mexican-American War. That's a dark chapter.
It is.
And according to the podcast, Polk kind of started it on purpose. Sent troops to a disputed border area, basically baiting the Mexicans into a fight.
He thought they'd back down.
Yeah.
But they didn't, and it turned into this long, bloody conflict.
He misjudged the situation big time, and people knew it even back then, right?
Yeah.
Ulysses S. Grant, he called it one of the most unjust wars ever. And he was there, he saw it firsthand. Makes you question if all that land was worth all the bloodshed.
That's the heart of it, isn't it? Polk's legacy. Can we admire what he accomplished without looking at the bad stuff?
It's tough. And speaking of bad stuff, let's talk about Polk's slaveholding. The podcast doesn't shy away. He went way beyond what was considered normal, even for slaveholders.
It's true.
He secretly bought teenagers from the East Coast, sent them to his plantation in Mississippi, a notoriously unhealthy place.
Terrible conditions, high risk of disease.
This wasn't just participating in a system, this was actively profiting from their suffering, putting their lives at risk for money.
And all this is happening as the abolition movement is growing. Polk knew the arguments against slavery, but he chose to not only keep it going, but to do things that even many slaveholders considered cruel.
And then he tried to cover it up.
Yeah.
Lied about why he bought and sold enslaved people, saying it was to keep families together.
Trying to make himself look good while doing something terrible.
A real hypocrite.
It shows you, even powerful people can be deeply flawed. And it's important to look at the whole picture, not just the accomplishments.
Absolutely. Okay, but let's not dwell on the negative. Let's talk about Sarah Polk, his wife. She had a lot of influence in Washington, right?
She did.
But in a quiet, behind-the-scenes way.
There's a story about how she started the tradition of playing Hail to the Chief when the president entered a room.
Oh, interesting. Why?
Apparently, James K. Polk was a pretty unassuming guy. Small, not imposing at all.
So Sarah wanted to make him seem more grand.
Exactly. She wanted him to command respect, even if he didn't look the part. It says a lot about both of them, their dynamic.
Yeah, she was smart, knew how to navigate the world of Washington.
She really did. A master of what we call soft power, using her connections, her political smarts, to help her husband.
And she really stepped up after his death.
Oh, yeah. Sarah Polk took it upon herself to protect her husband's legacy.
She wanted him to be remembered in a certain way.
Exactly. As a strong, decisive leader who accomplished everything he set out to do, she managed his papers, talked to historians, even influenced the design of his tomb.
So she was actively shaping how history saw him, emphasizing the good and downplaying the bad.
She believed him, and she wanted history to believe in him too.
But it does make you think about bias in historical accounts.
It does. History is always written from someone's point of view, and that point of view can be influenced by a lot of things.
So we always have to be careful, look at things from different angles.
Exactly. Be critical, don't just take everything at face value.
So where does all this leave us? How do we judge James K. Polk?
He changed America, that's for sure. His policies, they reshaped the map, added huge territories, places that would become California, Texas, Oregon. He made America a continental power.
But those achievements, they came at a cost. The Mexican-American War, pushing Native Americans off their land, the spread of slavery, it's all part of his story.
It is. And it's something we're still wrestling with today. How do we balance the good with the bad? How do we celebrate progress while acknowledging the harm that was done?
No easy answers, but it's a discussion worth having. The podcast really makes you think about progress, about power, about the consequences of our actions.
And it reminds us that history isn't just something that happened in the past. It's still with us, shaping our present and our future.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. Polk's ambition, his controversial choices, the human cost, the complicated legacy. But there's one more thing. His economic policies.
Right. Polk was a big believer in Jacksonian economics. Small government, free trade, hard money.
So a fiscal conservative, in a way.
Yes, and his policies, they made a difference. He brought back the independent treasury system, kept government money separate from private banks.
Interesting. Did it work?
Well, historians still debate that. Some say it stabilized the economy, others say it made things worse, limited credit.
Controversial even back then.
Definitely. And it shows how we still struggle with the same questions. Should the government be hands-off with the economy, or should it play a more active role?
A debate that never seems to go away.
Exactly. And Polk's presidency, it sheds light on that debate. Shows how political beliefs, economic policy, and the well-being of the country, they're all connected.
Polk also wanted lower tariffs, right?
He did. He thought free trade would be good for consumers and the economy.
Makes sense.
He got the Walker Tariff of 1846 passed, lowered tariffs a lot, good for Southern planters, but not for Northern industrialists. They needed tariffs to protect their businesses.
So, like his expansionist policies, his economic policies had winners and losers.
Exactly. It's always tough to govern a country with so many different interests.
It also shows that economic decisions, they're not just about ideas, they affect real people's lives.
Absolutely. And we have to think about those effects when we judge an economic policy.
So even though Polk is mostly known for Manifest Destiny, his economic policies had a lasting impact, shaped debates that we're still having today.
They did. It shows that to really understand history, we have to dig deeper. Look at the details, the long-term effects of decisions.
It's about seeing the connections, understanding that the past isn't just a bunch of random events. It all fits together, and it still matters today.
It does. And by exploring those connections, by understanding complicated figures like James K. Polk, we understand ourselves better, and our country, and the world we live in.
So as we move on, keep all this in mind. Polk's legacy, his ambition, his drive, his vision for America, but also the consequences, both good and bad.
He was a complex figure, and it's up to us to grapple with that complexity, to learn from the past, both the triumphs and the mistakes. To use that knowledge to create a better future really makes you think, Like expansion. Even when it's all about manifest destiny, there's often something else going on. Economic reasons, social reasons, some of them, well, pretty messed up.
Yeah, and you can really see that when you compare how Polk dealt with Oregon and Mexico. Willing to risk war with Mexico, weaker country, but with Great Britain, a superpower, he chose to negotiate. What if he had tried that with Mexico?
Interesting question. The podcast even suggests that California, a big chunk of what we got from Mexico, could have been acquired peacefully. Mexico was having money troubles back then. Maybe they would have sold California to us.
Wow. So maybe war wasn't inevitable.
Maybe not. It makes you think about what might have happened if Polk hadn't been so aggressive. Could we have avoided the war, the bloodshed, the displacement?
It's hard to say, but it's worth considering. Really highlights the human cost of these decisions, and that maybe things could have been different.
Absolutely. And it shows that we have to be critical when we look at history. Don't just accept the usual story. Dig a little deeper. Think about everyone's perspective.
Speaking of perspectives, let's go back to Sarah Polk. She was really good at managing her husband's image while he was alive, but after his death, she really took over, didn't she?
She did. Sarah Polk made it her mission to protect and promote her husband's legacy. She wanted him remembered as a strong, decisive leader, someone who achieved everything he set out to do. She controlled his papers, talked to historians, even had a say in the design of his tomb.
So she was shaping the historical record, making sure the good stuff stood out and the bad stuff was kind of hidden.
Yeah, and it wasn't necessarily with bad intentions. She truly believed her husband was great and wanted history to see him that way.
But it does make you think about bias, how personal feelings can affect how history is told.
It does. History is always written by someone with their own perspective, and that perspective is shaped by a lot of things.
So we have to be careful, look at things from different angles, be critical, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so looking back at everything, how should we judge James K. Polk? What's his impact on American history?
He was a transformative figure, that's for sure. His policies, especially expansion, changed the map of the U.S., added huge amounts of land, places that would become states like California, Texas, Oregon. He made America a continental power, no doubt about it.
But like we've been talking about, there was a cost. The Mexican-American War, pushing Native Americans off their land, the expansion of slavery, all part of his legacy.
It's a mixed bag, for sure, and it's something we're still dealing with today. How do you weigh the good against the bad? How do you celebrate progress while acknowledging the harm that was done?
Tough questions. The podcast really makes you think about those tough questions, about progress, power, the consequences of our actions.
It reminds us that history isn't just something that happened a long time ago. It's still with us, shaping our lives today and in the future.
Okay, we've covered a lot. Polk's ambition, his choices, the impact on people, the good and the bad. But there's one more area, his economic policies.
Right. Polk was all about Jacksonian economics. Small government, free trade, hard money.
So kind of a fiscal conservative, like we'd say today?
Yeah, you could say that. And his policies had an impact. He brought back the independent treasury system, kept government money separate from private banks.
Interesting. Did it work?
Well, historians still argue about that. Some say it helped stabilize the economy. Others say it made things worse because it limited the availability of credit.
Controversial, even back then.
Definitely. And it shows that we're still dealing with the same questions today. Should the government be involved in the economy, or should it stay out of it?
That debate never goes away.
Nope. And Polk's presidency, it sheds light on that debate. Shows the connection between political beliefs, economic policies, and what it all means for the country.
Polk was also a big supporter of lowering tariffs, wasn't he?
He was. He believed in free trade, thought it would help consumers and the overall economy.
Sounds reasonable.
He got the Walker Tariff passed in 1846, significantly reduced tariffs. It was a win for Southern planters who exported their crops, but not so much for Northern industrialists who relied on tariffs to protect their businesses from foreign competition.
So, like his expansionist policies, there were winners and losers with his economic policies.
That's right. Governing a diverse country with different interests is always a challenge.
It also shows that economic decisions, they're not just theoretical, they have real-world consequences for people.
Absolutely. You always have to think about the impact on people when you're evaluating an economic policy.
So even though we mostly associate Polk with manifest destiny and westward expansion, his economic policies really mattered. They shaped debates that are still going on today.
No doubt about it. It shows that to understand history, we can't just focus on the big events. We had to dig into the details, understand the long-term effects of decisions.
It's about making those connections, understanding that history isn't just a bunch of random events. It all ties together, and it still matters today.
It absolutely does. And by exploring those connections, by understanding complex figures like James K. Polk, we gain a deeper understanding of ourselves, our country, and the world we live in.
So as we move into the final part of this deep dive, let's remember that Polk's legacy is multifaceted. He was ambitious, driven, totally committed to his vision for America. But his actions had consequences, some good, some not so good.
He was a complex figure, and we have to grapple with that complexity, learn from the past, both the good and the bad, and use that knowledge to create a better future.
It's amazing how much Polk's story connects to like everything going on in America back then. Expansion, slavery, the economy, politics, even how we tell history.
It really does. One thing we haven't really gotten into is how his policies affected Native Americans.
Yeah, we talked about how his family moving to Tennessee involved pushing Native Americans off their land, but what about during his presidency?
Well, with all that expansion, it meant taking more and more Native American land. Thousands of Native Americans were forced off their ancestral homes, often under really terrible conditions.
So it was the same story, just on a bigger scale. The kind of displacement and exploitation that his own family benefited from.
Sadly, yes. Expansion for the U.S. often meant pushing Native Americans out.
A dark side of the story we can't forget.
Right, and it brings us back to that question we keep coming back to.
Mm-hmm.
How do we reconcile the good things that happened in the past with the bad things that made them possible?
It makes you think about our values, how we see history, what we can do to make things more just today.
Absolutely. It's a tough question, no easy answers. But talking about it, facing the hard parts of the past, that's how we can get to a better understanding of our history.
This whole deep dive has really shown that Polk's story is about so much more than just him. It's about America in the 1800s, the forces that shaped the country.
Definitely. And it raises questions that are still relevant today. Like, how do we balance ambition with doing what's right? How do we deal with the legacy of colonialism and expansion? How do we create a society that works for everyone, not just a few?
Big questions, but that's what makes this kind of deep dive so valuable. It's not just learning facts, it's about using the past to understand the present, and maybe even to create a better future.
Well said. I hope this has made you think about Polk, Manifest Destiny, and all the complexities of American history.
And to keep asking those tough questions, challenge the easy answers, look for a deeper understanding of the past.
Because by facing the past, we can hopefully create a more just and equitable future for everyone.
Thanks for taking us through all this. It's been eye-opening, that's for sure.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, keep exploring James K. Polk's story. There's always more to learn, more to uncover, more to discuss.